think that this disease was kind of a litmus test for any country. They must have the capability to tackle this effectiveness of the functioning of the state government system and etc. There were some considerations that during the pandemic, authoritarianism again demonstrated its higher efficiency rather than democracy. Wrong. I am sure that, and the experience of Uzbekistan demonstrated that most effective states were those who were able to create a linkage between government and civil society. I think that initial stage in Uzbekistan, we once again witnessed that our out-of-date medical healthcare system was not able to tackle the issue. But then, together with NGOs, mobilizing both state and private healthcare system, country somehow handled the issue, solving simultaneously two goals. First, saving lives, and second, saving economy. More than $5 billion were invested for confronting coronavirus. Maybe it's a figure not very impressive for United States, but for Uzbekistan it was a big deal. And as a result, country was able to avoid worst case scenario. Our death rate is less than 1%, and relatively so far, it's not over yet. We all understand that Uzbekistan is doing pretty well. And I think that most important factor behind all this relative success was the program of economic and political modernization launched by President Mirziyoyev 4 years ago. The fact that government started to listen to civil society, to NGOs, to media was not launched, perhaps the situation in Uzbekistan will be much worse. And I'd like to use this chance to express gratitude to our partners in the United States for providing Uzbekistan with very important help in confronting coronavirus. It was a high appreciation received by Uzbek public, and we're grateful to the United States for helping us in a time of need. Today, for us, even in the time of transformation, at the time of the testimony, transformation, guaranteeing that it will last and will deepen is very important. 1 month ago, John, President Mirziyoyev signed, to my mind, very important document which should not be underestimated. Its main aim is to trigger, to start large-scale privatization of state assets. More than 2,000 enterprises, real estates now belonging to the state will be sold off. And I think that it will transform society. To my mind, it's the last bastion of which created some kind of impediment for political modernization, because such kind of a privatization definitely will change the mechanism of efficiency of local and central government and will transform mentality of people. We hope that implementing of this program will complete what's been done before, and it will mark transformation of Uzbekistan to a new kind of a society. Alongside with economic development, I'd like just to draw your attention of audience to the social policy done in Uzbekistan. Any kind of transformation is a challenge for people, for small business, and we fully realize that creating kind of a pillar protecting vulnerable segment of population from the impact of liberalization, economic liberalization, which will inevitably have some negative impact on incomes. It's very important. And during the coronavirus pandemic, it was a very important part of policy of both government and parliament. during this pandemic, the allowances to the vulnerable segment of population increased 1.5 times, or more than 10% of population started to receive additional support from government. Social policy also means for us education. Frankly, maybe it's the most decisive sphere for further transformation, because new level of society, democracy, open society, needs people with different level of education and skill. During the last 4 years, the salary of teachers in Uzbekistan increased 1.5 times, and it's interesting that 15,000 males returned back to the schools, which is very important. They started to teach, and I think that it's today we have a different type of schools. The number of universities doubled, and we're happy to say that many of them are international, including first American campus in Uzbekistan, Webster University. And foreign policy has been transformed. I know that here, perhaps it's for this audience, it's a very important issue. At last, relationship with our immediate neighbors are not only proclaimed to be most important priority, but actually, in fact, it was implemented as a most important dimension of Uzbek foreign policy. By the way, I think that inclusion of Afghanistan to the Central Asian equation was very important, and today we have a very active dialogue with Kabul in all matters, including building up new railroads, which will transform not only economic but political landscape in Central Asia. And if before it was difficult to set up consultation summits in Central Asia, today we have some even competition among the capitals of Central Asia to host next summit, which is a good sign. It's of course, we're not talking about integration yet, but more intensive dialogue, readiness to compromise and to address the challenging issues of Central Asia today is obvious. And in short, we can state that today we have completely different political atmosphere in Central Asia. And before concluding, I'd like to tell our audience that for Uzbekistan, relationship with the United States is very important. It is, we have a profound interest in presence of United States in our region. Political dialogue, economic cooperation, partnership in humanitarian sphere is very important. And I think that the last 4 years were kind of a revival of our partnership. And today we might state that definition, strategic partnership between our countries is not something only proclaimed, but indeed today we have a better and more profound, sincere, candid dialogue in all spheres, and we're looking forward for expanding of our partnership with the new administration as well. So let me conclude here, and then we'll be happy to listen to your comments and respond to your questions. Thank you, John.
Senator, thank you. John, you've been watching Uzbekistan very closely as the DAS for Central Asia for some time. Your thoughts, please.
Sure. Well, let me welcome Senator Safoev. I think it's great to have him visiting Washington again. He's been an instrumental figure, I think, in improving the relationship between the United States and Uzbekistan. I'll pick up where you left off. I did my very first diplomatic assignment in Tashkent back in 1994. And so I've been a close observer of US-Uzbekistan relations for, the now almost 30 years since independence. And I think it's fair to say that our relationship has never been better.
Exactly.
And truly, we are, I think, increasingly finding strategic areas of cooperation. I'll start where you left off with foreign policy. President Mirziyoyev has been, I think, instrumental in transforming Central Asia and opening up new possibilities for the region. The relationships between the countries are terrific. I want to commend Uzbekistan and also Kazakhstan for just in the last few days rendering assistance to the Kyrgyz Republic as it continues to struggle with the coronavirus epidemic. But we've seen, trade, intra-regional trade increase dramatically. And that, I think, is clearly a realization of the potential that has been unlocked by your government's good neighbor policy. More broadly, I think within the region, we also see Uzbekistan as a critical partner in our ongoing efforts to try to stabilize and find a peaceful solution to the conflict in Afghanistan. And I think that's built on the joint realization that success in this endeavor is important, not just for Afghanistan, but for the entire region. And that Uzbekistan and all of Central Asia stand to benefit tremendously if we're able to resolve the conflict, recreate infrastructure, build connectivity across the regions, and open up, I think, access to foreign markets for Central Asia. In terms of the bilateral relationship, and particularly the ambitious reform agenda that President Mirziyoyev has undertaken, we've been deeply impressed by the progress made over the last few years, the progress in terms of media and certainly unblocking websites and the increasingly active media space that we're seeing in the country, civil society as well. And I agree with you, Senator, that coronavirus has been a real litmus test, not just for a young democracy like Uzbekistan, but for all of our democracies around the world. The United States, as you well know, is also struggling to deal with this epidemic even as we speak. And so the progress made in spite of that epidemic has been very, very encouraging. And we know that you're in town today along with Foreign Minister Kamilov and a delegation from Uzbekistan in order to attend our annual bilateral consultations later this week, where we look forward to deepening our cooperation, deepening our partnership in the political dimension, in the human dimension, economic dimension. We're looking to encourage more and more American companies to invest in Uzbekistan. And I know that we're working very closely with your government to improve the investment climate, to strengthen the protection of intellectual property, to strengthen your judicial system so that foreign investors feel confident that they can safely invest their funds in Uzbekistan. And so there's a lot, I think there's still a lot of progress that still needs to be made, but we see you as critical and strategic partners, I think, in achieving that progress.
Thank you.
Thank you.
John, thank you for that. And now we'd like to bring in Dr. Todd, who can offer a slightly larger perspective.
I think, first of all, I'm delighted to be part of this panel today. And, I'm honored just to be in the presence of Senator Safoev, who has done so much for Uzbekistan's relationship with the United States. Picking up where Das Henick left off, I think he did a great job of covering all the issues that we're working on currently with Uzbekistan. And I would speak more specifically in the security sphere, since that's usually what I tend to work on. And I think that this has been a year where, despite all of the challenges related to COVID, we've actually been able to accomplish so much. Uzbekistan remains a steadfast and reliable partner in Central Asia for the United States. We continue to work together on common interests, including border security, countering terrorism and violent extremism in the region. And of course, the United States is extraordinarily grateful for all the support that Uzbekistan is providing in the conflict in Afghanistan. So I think where we're at now is, as has been mentioned, so much progress has been made over the last 4 years, and we're really taking stock of where do we go from here. General McKenzie, the commander of US Central Command, was just recently out in the region, visited Uzbekistan, met with President Mirziyoyev, and I think that our partnership in the security sphere with Uzbekistan is only going to continue to grow. As you mentioned, I'm at the National Defense University. This year we have our first student from Uzbekistan, and we're delighted that we're growing the sphere of professional military education. And I think that that's only going to continue to increase in future years. that's just a quick overview, and I think now we can go to more broader questions, and I'd be happy to answer more on that as well.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank
Okay, Senator Safoev, you talked about a key element, maybe the key element of Uzbek foreign policy being outreach to its neighbors. We've had some interesting and very positive developments lately as Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan have teamed up to help Kyrgyzstan. If you could talk a little bit more about that, I think that would be of interest.
You know, John, you know Central Asia very well, maybe better than anyone. And you know that Central Asian countries are so binded to each other historically that you cannot prosper without the development of your immediate neighbors. It's a history. From the time immemorial, Central Asia was kind of a single economic, cultural, linguistic, sometimes political zone. And only in Soviet time it was divided between nations, sometimes in a very controversial form, which created more problems than solved, which still we should handle with that. And that's why the spillover effect of achievements and negative development still exists. You cannot just watch how the situation worsens in your neighboring countries. You should help. The United States understands that better than any other state and demonstrates the ability to help other countries. And we know that Kyrgyzstan is going through difficult times, again, unfortunately, politically and economically. And of course, to helping Kyrgyz society, Kyrgyz state, it's in our best interest. And I think that the fact that Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan joined in providing help to our partners in Kyrgyzstan was very timely and very important. By the way, I'd like just to draw your attention to the fact that Uzbekistan, first time in his history, not only was a recipient of international help assistance during the pandemic, but provided the help to 11 other countries, including one country member of European Union. So it demonstrates, to my mind, new role of Uzbekistan.
Okay, thank you. Let me follow up with one more question. You talked about efforts in Uzbekistan to improve the investment climate. You mentioned very interesting a decision to try and divest of state companies. This is also related to your broader economic outreach. So where is Uzbekistan now on the question of membership in the Eurasian Economic Union and also the related question of membership in the World Trade Organization?
It's a very good question, very important, both. Joining WTO is highest priority for Uzbekistan, and we're grateful to the United States for tremendous assistance in preparing Uzbekistan to join World Trade Organization. Last week, Deputy Prime Minister Umurzakov had a very successful meeting with Secretary of Commerce, Mr. Ross, and once again, we got an assurance that the United States will support Uzbekistan in joining WTO. It's very, very important to fully realize that there is a need for us to join it. I don't think that we might define that there is a controversial for Uzbekistan. There is some segment of Uzbek society experts who raise some questions in regard to the joining WTO, saying that it will undermine ability of Uzbek business to confront during world competition. But majority of population, and there is a consensus in government and parliament in regard with joining of WTO. The next organization which you mentioned, the process of joining created more controversy in our society. And there are many questions about whether Uzbekistan should join this organization or not. There are perhaps three main factors to consider the possibility of joining this organization. For me, first important, millions of Uzbek working in the countries members of this organization. It's our citizens, protecting their rights, creating for them better opportunity for earn money, not to be abused is very important. And by joining this organization, Uzbekistan might get a more opportunity to do so. Second, geography. Only double landlocked country in the world. We need new transportation routes to get to our main markets, and being part of this organization means to be part of their system of the privileges and some incentives, and which will diminish the transportation cost for Uzbek export and import, which is important for price of international goods in Uzbekistan and for our exported goods. And lastly, still the main destination of Uzbek export, our main markets, are countries member of this organization, Economic Union. And that's why Uzbekistan, after the long considerations, creating some task force group, decided to test the water and to become a observer country on this state. Let's see. Our main question is whether to be a member of this state will diminish our independence in providing, in implementing the foreign economic policy, and whether it will not undermine our small and medium business position vis-a-vis its more experienced partners in other countries. So let's try, because there is pro and cons, and after considering first years, government and Parliament of Uzbekistan will decide. It's open question still.
Okay, thank you. Let me follow up on this topic with John. John, the U.S. view regarding Uzbekistan and the WTO and the EU.
Sure. Well, as Senator Safoev mentioned, we have an assistance program, advisors that are helping the government of Uzbekistan with its WTO application. I'll note that, of course, the WTO, if you look at global trade, includes countries that account for 90–95% of global trade, compared to a much smaller number for the Eurasian Economic Union. That said, Senator Safoev's, I think, concerns about the specifics of Uzbekistan and as it looks at its trading partners. I would simply say that we believe that Uzbekistan should do what's really in its interests, and you should look very carefully at the trade regimes and organizations. The WTO is one with a long and proven track record of
Yes.
of having of opening up trade to the benefit of its membership. I think the Eurasian Economic Union is a much younger organization and has yet to establish itself in that regard. And Uzbekistan should look very carefully at whether or not it is indeed getting the benefits that membership in such an organization promises. And I would encourage Uzbekistan to talk to the other members of the Eurasian Economic Union and see if they, in fact, are getting the benefits that they thought that they would get from joining that union.
A very astute answer. Okay. Dr. Todd, I apologize. I'm going to throw you a curveball right now because it makes sense in terms of the flow of the conversation. The last economic entity which impacts on Central Asia, of course, is the One Belt and Road Initiative from Beijing. If you have some thoughts about the impact of that for Uzbekistan and Central Asia, and I'll ask Senator Safoev the same question. Please, Brianne.
So I think that certainly the countries in Central Asia are benefiting from the Belt and Road Initiative. And of course, Uzbekistan has a number of infrastructure projects involved in that as well. You have a rail line that's running from Uzbekistan through Kyrgyzstan to China. A lot of progress is being made on that. There's several other infrastructure projects that are currently under development as well. So certainly Uzbekistan has much to gain from the Belt and Road Initiative. I would just caution that I think sometimes that there are projects that are already being considered or under development. Certainly in Uzbekistan's case, as Senator Safoev mentioned, there were projects that, just haven't really been able to be, worked on until the last 4 years. It's only been over the last couple of years that we've seen some progress made. That doesn't necessarily mean that it was because of the Belt and Road Initiative. So I think sometimes there are projects tagged with that label and China gets the credit for doing the work. But certainly, I think Uzbekistan deserves a large amount of credit as well for all the work that they're doing domestically to improve their own transit and transport systems.
That also is a very sharp, clever observation. Okay, Sodiq, over to you. Your Uzbekistan view of the Belt and Road Initiative.
John, first of all, let's start with a point that Shanghai Treaty Organization is not only about the Belt and Road.
Correct.
Next year, we're going to mark its 20 years of kind of a jubilee when 6 countries of Central Asia plus Russia and China set this organization. And the initial goal was to resolve all the border disputes, to create some system for strengthening the security. And I think that if there isn't the one reasons behind the fact that Central Asia is so far was a region without some major international conflicts, Shanghai Treaty Organization somehow contributed to that as well, at least creating by some legal framework and saying that there is no transborder disputes or some disputed areas. It was good when they all recognized the existing borders. During these 20 years, organization drew a lot of attention. Today, it has 8 member states, 4 states as observers, and 6 states as having a dialogue. So it's expanding. Sometimes it's good expansion, sometimes it's not good. But today, we should say that it's one of the most influential organizations, which comprise 1/3 of world population, 40% of territory, and 1/3 of the world GDP. And it has 2 main, let's say, pillars of activity: security, and Uzbekistan hosting a regional anti-terroristic structure is somehow responsible for efficient responding the transnational threats to peace and stability. And second, regional development, not only economic cooperation, but regional development. We hope that despite of some problems, this organization will be structure for real action. And transportation is one of the important dimension of our policy, because again, let me repeat, being doubly landlocked, Uzbekistan needs new access, and we hope that Belt and Road Initiative will create developed infrastructure to get an access to Central Asian countries to the closest seaports in Indian Ocean and Persian Gulf.
If I could just add, Uzbekistan should not have to choose between investment partners. I mean, of course, Uzbekistan needs the kind of infrastructure investment that companies from Beijing and companies from Moscow and companies from the West can offer. But to Dr. Todd's point, I would say you have to look past the label on this project and look at the details of each of these projects. And Uzbekistan should not be accepting infrastructure projects, loans that are not transparent, that are not in accordance with good governance, that are not consistent with the standards that are established by the World Bank, by the Asian Development Bank, even by the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, which I think adheres to international standards. As long as the projects, I think, adhere to those standards, and it's transparent for all Uzbek citizens to see that these are loans that ultimately they will have to repay through their taxes, that if these are all in the interests of the people of Uzbekistan, then by all means Uzbekistan should participate. Our concern is that not all of the projects that have been tagged with that Belt and Road Initiative label have adhered to those international standards. And so we would just encourage your government going forward to look at all of these projects very closely and make sure they're truly in the interests of your people.
Good point. All right. Dr. Todd, I'd like to introduce a new subject here, which is the treatment by Beijing of the Uyghurs and the impact in Central Asia, but also perhaps in Uzbekistan. So your thoughts, and we'll turn to Senator Safoev.
So I think the Uyghur issue is definitely relevant for Central Asia, although I would say probably less visible for Uzbekistan than as we've seen perhaps in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, as those countries both border China, and there have been a number of incidents involving everything from activists protesting to ethnic Kazakhs and Kyrgyz being detained in China, to incidents where they have come back to Central Asia and sought asylum. It's certainly been more visible in those countries than, say, Uzbekistan. That said, Uzbekistan does have a sizable Uyghur population, and so certainly the considerations of those individuals should be taken. The fact that Uzbekistan has a very close relationship with China tells me that they should be able to have a conversation about the Uyghur issue as partners do. And that's certainly something that Uzbekistan will have to consider going forward, I think.
Senator Safoev, your thoughts has this been a complicating question in your relationship with Beijing?
Well, first of all, I agree with Professor Todd that China is a very important partner for Uzbekistan, our biggest trade partner, biggest investor to Uzbekistan today. We appreciate our relationship with China in many spheres, and we do hope that domestic development with China, all nations, prosperity of all minorities, ethnic and religious, in the best interest of Beijing as well. Frankly, John, I do believe that problems of human rights doesn't have a linguistic or ethnic or religious. It's universal. And all countries should concern about the situation of the human rights, freedoms of the people. And frankly, we wish that China will guarantee the development of all nations and minorities in this country where, well, we have the best interest and prosperity of China as a whole, and all its national minorities.
Okay, thank you. John, I'd like to broaden this a little bit. An important part of American policy in Central Asia has been the C5+1. Last summer, in that meeting, there was a focus on COVID and Afghanistan. Any developments since then?
Yeah. I think thanks in large part to the leadership that Uzbekistan has shown in the region in terms of improving relations among the countries, there's been an opportunity that we have very eagerly taken advantage of in the last year and a half to reinvigorate and revitalize the C5+1 platform. And so in that time period, we've had, I think, 4 ministerial level meetings of the C5+1. And as you mentioned, John, most recently meeting in June that both Secretary Pompeo and Undersecretary Hale participated in, along with the 5 foreign ministers from Central Asia. Since then, despite COVID, we continue to really work at this platform. So I have chaired, along with colleagues, U.S. participation in 3 C5+1 working groups since June, including most recently last week. We had Tajikistan hosted the C5+1 security working group. Earlier this summer, we had also the C5+1 energy and environment working group, as well as the C5+1 economic working group. And what those working groups do is they give us an opportunity to take the guidance that the ministers have provided and really go deep at an expert level on things like renewable energy, on things like border security, on a whole range of topics, and start to then line up our programmatic assistance and our diplomatic efforts along with the partnerships we have bilaterally with each of the countries in the region to really advance those areas that are most ripe for regional collaboration.
Okay. Actually, I would agree with that. Just to go beyond my moderator role for a minute, because I think stability in Central Asia is very important for the United States. And C5+1 promotes stability, and especially all the initiatives you refer to do the same. Actually, Dr. Todd, if you want to weigh in on this before I raise one other issue and then turn to the audience.
No, I think C5+1 is absolutely a positive initiative for our relationship with Central Asia. I think sometimes it gets thrown in with other countries' similar initiatives because there are many countries that have a similar format with the region. But as has been pointed out, aside from the ministerial meetings, there are a number of working groups. And what I would add in addition to C5+1, there's now the trilateral that has been set up between the United States, Uzbekistan, and Afghanistan. So we are certainly working with our Uzbek partners on a number of levels. and with other countries in the region as well. So I think C5+1 is a great foundation, but there are many other projects that build off of that as well.
All right. We've devoted most of our time to foreign policy issues. I want to come back to domestic scene in Uzbekistan. Sadiq, you mentioned some very interesting initiatives relating to selling of state firms, improving investment climate. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention one other subject, which has often been a complicating factor in bilateral relations with the United States, which is human rights in Uzbekistan. The issue, I mean, I remember working with you 18 years ago on the question of the UN torture rapporteur. I know there's been recent progress in the area. Anything to say about the human rights scene in Uzbekistan?
I don't know, maybe I will going to reveal some secret, but we're going to sign first time after our political consultation, the first statement. First time in history, there is appreciation of what Uzbekistan has done so far in this sphere, and frankly, some major concerns were expressed in these documents. I think that's a great achievement for Uzbekistan. The fact that Uzbekistan was removed from the list of countries of particular concern in regards with religious freedoms, this is a great achievement. And I think that today, honestly, Uzbekistan's best achievement during the past 4 years was foreign policy, which tremendously changed the landscape in Central Asia, and completely new situation in regard with the human rights. Other spheres, I would be reluctant to include in the list of achievements, but here, perhaps most progress must be noticed. Today, no anyone who might be considered as political prisoners. The registration of religious organizations going on. We're going to adopt new law on religious freedom and religious organizations. Media is completely different, and they're acting very aggressively, sometimes unknowingly, but it's very positive and it's very good. Parliament today plays a different role, openly criticizing government officials in all levels, and it's something new for Uzbekistan landscape. NGOs number of growing, and we hope that next elections, presidential elections in Uzbekistan will be completely different from previous one. We hope that they will be recognized and free and fair.
John, yes, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think Uzbekistan deserves enormous credit for, as you said, addressing the problem of torture, political prisoners, media freedom. We didn't even mention forced labor.
Exactly.
Uzbekistan, has gone from being, frankly, a negative poster child in the world to, frankly, being, I think, an exceptional case of where they've taken millions of people who used to be forced into labor are no longer a case, and continues to work with the International Labor Organization to try to continue to address that problem as well. I would say if I could put out there some of the areas where I'd love to see continued progress is certainly civil society. It would be great to see more local and international NGOs able to register and operate freely in Uzbekistan. Your country had parliamentary elections not long ago, and we look forward to working with the parliament to strengthen the role of political parties. It would be great going forward to see it become easier for political parties to register and compete in the country so that there is really a choice for Uzbek citizens and they can choose between political parties that espouse different and maybe even competing ideologies and policy positions. So I think there's work still to be done, but we should not minimize the incredible progress that Uzbekistan has made over the last 7 years. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll now turn to our audience. In fact, one of the things I love about doing events on Uzbekistan here is it becomes like old home week, and I reacquaint myself with friends from the past. And our first question is from an old friend of yours, Sadiq, that's Ambassador Richard Hoagland. He asked, is Uzbekistan still working with its other Central Asian neighbors to consider forming some sort of bloc, perhaps akin to ASEAN or the Nordic Council? And then he says, such a bloc would strengthen the region vis-a-vis major powers like China and Russia. Your thoughts?
Ambassador Hoagland, thank you very much for your question. Thank you for joining us in this audience today. According to our foreign policy conception, which was adopted by Parliament as a law, there is prohibition for Uzbekistan to be part of any military bloc, to form, and to have any kind of a military base on its soil or send troops abroad. So perhaps it's an answer to your question.
Okay. John, do you want to comment on this?
Really a question for Central Asia. We look forward to continuing with the C5+1 platform. We do think that there's opportunities for connectivity and integration in the region, but which direction that goes is up to the countries of the region.
If we're talking about the military bloc, it's beyond question, of course. Economic cooperation, more, and political dialogue, humanitarian cooperation is something different, and we are pursuing this. Exactly on regional dimension is the most important dimension of Uzbek foreign policy. Maybe it's a little bit premature to talk about the integration, because integration is not only economic interest, it's shared values, shared principles, and we should still work on it yet. And perhaps today would be better to talk about the more deeper cooperation, partnership between countries.
Thank you. And Dr. Todd, would you like to weigh in here as well?
No, I would agree with that. I think that the head of state meetings that are held are a great opportunity for continued cooperation among the countries in the region. As Senator Safoev mentioned, there's probably still some work to be done before full integration occurs. But the fact that the cooperation is occurring, that they're continuing dialogue, I think is a great indication of future progress.
Again, Uzbekistan is like old home week. So our next question is from Jennifer Murtazashvili, a professor at the University of Pittsburgh and one of the smartest people in the U.S. Embassy, Tashkent, when I was there 20 years ago. Her question is this: President Mirziyoyev has spoken on the need to reform local governance. He actively criticized the performance of officials at the local level. Recently, he repeated his call for the election of governors at the subnational level. Senator Safoev, can you talk more about the state of these reforms and when we might expect those elections to take place?
Jennifer, thank you very much for this very important question. It's in the best interest of our parliament, first of all, development of local parliamentarism and upgrading their role in playing society. By the way, I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that first time in history today, local parliaments today authorize and have their legal right to consider local budget. Never before it was the case when the representatives of the people were involved to the process of finding taxation and allocation of this taxation via local budget. By the way, fiscal decentralization in Uzbekistan is going on. Today, the assets available for local authority distribute is 25 times bigger than it was 4 years ago. So it's process pretty impressive. And the point of president is that it cannot be done by head of executive authorities only. It should be approved by people representatives, by local parliaments, kingashes as we call them. Professor Murtazashvili knows well how they today work. Now, on agenda is two steps, which is not beyond horizons. I think that it will happen soon. I cannot, let's now try again to test water, how it should be done, not to undermine the existing system. And especially in the time of COVID, it's not easy, but it's definitely will happen rather sooner than later. First, division of power in local level, when the Hakims will be not anymore the heads of local parliaments. This is number one. It's an initiative proposed by President Mirziyoyev, and it's very important for further democratization, bringing to democracy grassroots level, and we will understand that. And second, it's growing demand in society for election of local governors. Nobody rejects this idea. Perhaps it's time for Uzbekistan to make some constitutional amendments and to adopt new law on local governance system, which will create the legal framework for that. we're working on that. I cannot specify the date, next month, next year, but it will happen,
Okay,
definitely.
Next question is from energy expert John Roberts. He asks, how are energy relations with other regional states progressing? Can you tell us how the energy cooperation with Azerbaijan is working? And is there a prospect of gas imports from Turkmenistan?
Import to Uzbekistan,
Yes.
or first of all, we are working hard was for creating the cooperation with all Central Asian countries, including Azerbaijan. Last year, first time again in the history of Uzbekistan, oil and gas companies started to invest to Azerbaijan and work together with Sogas on the exploration and selling the energy together. We work together with Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan on transporting Central Asian gas to China, which is clearly demonstrate that there is a one system. And again, I'd like to tell you that it's one point which again vividly demonstrates the need for more Central Asian cooperation. You cannot benefit your energy resources without cooperation with your immediate neighbors. You cannot jump over your neighbors and bring it worldwide. You should cooperate.
John?
Yeah, if I could just add, I mean, I'd like to give a plug for one of our USAID programs in the region, and that is the Central Asia Regional Energy Market Program. A number of years ago, the World Bank did a study, and they estimated that the region collectively loses $1 billion a year because of the deterioration of the networks that used to exist in the former Soviet Union and their inability to trade energy and electricity effectively with one another. And so our USAID program is working with all five governments to try to, one, reconnect that infrastructure, but also work on reconnecting the soft infrastructure, the regulations and the processes that are necessary to have efficient electricity trade back and forth. But it's a great example of the benefits of greater connectivity in the region, which will be not only a political benefit, but of immediate economic benefits.
By the way, John, let me add that one of the tremendous changes was happened during the last 4 years, that Central Asia became more open to regional, large-scale projects. Before, let's admit, due to the Uzbekistan position, it was impossible. Uzbekistan used to block all the, you remember well, initiative of European partners, American partners on big-scale regional projects. Today, we try to encourage our partners to implement not only country scale projects, but regional projects. And I think it's very important for energy sector as well.
Terrific. Okay, and Dr. Todd, do you have any comments on this?
I'm going to pass on this question so we can go on to the others, because I know you're getting more questions.
Right, we're zooming in here. Okay, again, Old Home Week. We have a question from Ambassador Pamela Stratton. Pleasure to see Senator Safoev in the US again, and I'm glad to see that the ABCs continue. Please see progress continue on so many fronts. A question on foreign policy. What needs to happen next with Afghanistan, and what is the role for Uzbekistan's parliament in that advance?
Ambassador Spratland, happy that you joined. Thank you very much again for everything you've done in Uzbekistan for our strategic partnership. You were behind of many new trends in our bilateral relationship, and we remember your endeavor, and thank you very much for your wonderful job in Uzbekistan. In regard with Afghanistan, as you know, what's to my mind, it's one of the most strategic changes what happened during the recent 4 years, that this country started to be recognized as a part of Central Asia. Before, using the maps of all Soviet times, it was recognized something beyond of the region. But now today we all admit that it's due to the geography, linguistic, ethnic, and many other reasons. This is a part of Central Asia. And Uzbekistan tries to play more important role. Before, during the 25 years, pre-Mirziyoyev stage, never any highest level meetings between Uzbek and Afghan officials happened.
Okay.
It's interesting, but now, during the 4 years, President met at least 10 times with a higher level. And last week, Dr. Abdullah visited Uzbekistan and met President Mirziyoyev, talking about the inter-Afghan reconciliation. For us, it's outbreak to the completely new environment. And to my mind, again, let me emphasize, John, and I appreciate the chance for to address this issue. If together, with the support of United States, we will be able to create trans-Afghan transport corridor, it will help not only Central Asian countries, but it will help the peace process in Afghanistan, because nothing serves better to the peace like trade. And transport corridor, railroad in Afghanistan, and we agreed with the Afghan government on this project. We were ready to work together. And if international financial organization, where United States has a very important role, will support this, and if there will be railroad connecting Central Asia with Gwadar and Karachi ports, it will change everything in Afghanistan and in Central Asia.
Another question from an old friend of Uzbekistan, Ariel Cohen, Dr. Ariel Cohen. It's on the same subject. If the U.S. pulls out of Afghanistan, how would the great power balance there affect Central Asia? So if you have a comment on that, I'll turn to Dr. Todd to also comment on that.
You know, we talked with Ambassador Herbst on this issue, and I'd like just to borrow his line on this. To my mind, even Central Asia will make even more important for the United States and other countries, because the influence of Central Asian countries and Uzbekistan on Afghanistan will increase definitely. And partnership with Uzbekistan will mean better opportunity to help Afghanistan. I have no doubt that even in a case of full withdrawal of American troops from Afghanistan, the interest of Washington towards Afghanistan will sustain, because so much was invested to this country, and nobody can allow to create new vacuum available for international terrorism and all kind of bad guys to use Afghanistan again as a platform for attacks.
Thank you. Dr. Todd, you want to comment?
Sure. I would say that Uzbekistan's concerns about the situation in Afghanistan are very similar to their neighbors' concerns, which of course is the security situation, but also the sovereignty and independence of Afghanistan and the stability of the government there. I think, as Senator Safoev mentioned, withdrawal of troops does not mean a withdrawal of U.S. interest. The U.S. is going to continue to be invested in Afghanistan and its future. I think that's a very important point to emphasize. And similarly, I would say that if troops are withdrawn from Afghanistan, that is in no way indicative of our interest in Central Asia. I would definitely separate those two separate issues, because we will continue to have enduring interests in Central Asia. We will continue to be engaged with our partners there. I think that that's a separate issue from troop withdrawals in Afghanistan.
John, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd just echo what Brianne said, which is that the United States, if you look at our Central Asia strategy, which was adopted earlier this year, it makes it very clear that the United States has a long-term strategic interest in Central Asia in and of itself. With regard to Afghanistan, and I won't comment on any kind of plans for troop withdrawal, I'll say that we are also invested in the future of Afghanistan. Exactly. And increasingly, if our military presence were to decline in Afghanistan, that means we're going to be looking to partners like Uzbekistan and others in the region to consolidate the gains that have been made in Afghanistan going forward. And so, our interests in the success of Uzbekistan and the success of Central Asia, I would expect to continue for many, many years to come.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Alisher Umerdinov. Uzbekistan recently started to build new economic diplomacy. As one of the important pillars of that diplomacy, US-Uzbekistan concluded a bilateral investment treaty in 1994, but that was never implemented. Where do things stand on this and on FDI, foreign direct investment, from the United States into Uzbekistan?
We're working with our partners, and we hope that we will achieve at last the conclusion of this agreement.
Okay. We're almost at time, but we have another question, actually several questions. One from another old friend, Ambassador and former Assistant Secretary Alice Wells. Hello, Senator Safoev. Welcome back to Washington. What role is social media playing in Uzbekistan? Are you seeing an Uzbek language community growing? Does it promote national unity or division?
Ambassador, happy to have you here, and thank you very much for your question. Social media is, in Uzbekistan today is a very important part of decision-making process. Authorities at all levels follow the publications in social media and react immediately, which is, to my mind, a very positive trend in Uzbekistan. Last month, government and President Mirziyoyev initiated several decisions which were addressing which were aimed to strengthening the role of Uzbek language linguistically, and it's an important part for consolidation of the society in Uzbekistan, including improving of education in all levels, including highest education. So it's very, very important, but sensitive and let's say not. It's expensive, but government of Uzbekistan and parliament are very much committed to continue this program of supporting the studying of the Uzbek language and improving its role in Uzbek society.
All right. I think our time is up. I'd like to thank very much our guests, Senator Sodiq Safoev, Deputy Assistant Secretary John Henick, and Professor Brianne Todd. And thank you all for tuning in, and thank you for your wonderful questions. And I hope we'll be doing, and expect we'll be doing more on Uzbekistan and Central Asia in the coming months.
Thank you. Thank you, John, for wonderful moderating, as usual.